Hi guys! Welcome to True Crime Wine Wednesday. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for being here every single Wednesday, even when I don't upload on a Wednesday. But today's a Wednesday. Ugh, is anybody else just like overdoing it on their children's Halloween candy? I have this Wonder Bar just like sitting on the table staring at me and I just needed to pick it up and just look at it for a while. But I know if I start right now, I won't stop for the rest of the day. So we're just gonna put it back where it'll stare at me for the rest of the video. Wonder Bar and Twix, those are my go-to. You guys have to let me know what you guys are stealing from the stashes. While you're thinking about that, I have a message for you. Before we get started today, I want to give a big, huge, massive thank you to Helix Sleep, our sponsor today. I wish I had recorded Brent waking up every single morning without fail to tell me how uncomfortable he was prior to us trying Helix products, because that footage in itself would have spoke volumes. I feel like once we solved one problem for him, there was another. If you don't know what Helix Sleep is, they make premium mattresses and beddings that are custom to your individual needs, and then they ship it right to your door so you don't have to deal with the hassle of going to find one for yourself. The ordering process to choose what fit is best for you was so fun, so easy. Brent and I just did it online. We got to take a fun little quiz together and find out what would be best to suit our needs, and then based on our answers, a mattress was recommended to us. I'm a side sleeper, he's a back sleeper. We both like medium to firm support. So based on those answers, we went with their recommendation of the Dusk Luxe mattress. Let me tell you, they nailed it. At first when it arrived, I was really nervous because it comes in a box and you're just like, okay. How can a king size mattress fit in a box this size? And B, how could it be comfortable? And then Helix was like, hold my beer. We got the whole family involved since we're still at my parents' house for another 2 weeks. And I'll be honest, it was so fun and exciting to just see the whole process go, unboxing it, unwrapping it. And then you're just mesmerized, watching this king size mattress just inflate in front of you in all of its comfort and glory. We've had our mattress for a couple weeks now and I'm so in love. Brent and I sold our bed frame when we moved, so we were both a little bit bummed out lately, feeling okay, why did we do that? Missing our old bed. And now we are so jazzed to get a whole new frame for this bad boy and get all set up and all cozy and snuggled into our new room. The firmness of it is flawless. At first, I was like, this is too comfortable to be supportive or good for you. I thought you had to have one or the other. If you wanted to be comfortable in the morning, your back was gonna hurt. If you wanted a good back in the morning, you had to be super firm. But this one is the absolute best of both worlds. Now our problem is that everybody in the house wants it. If you're nervous about buying something like a mattress online, don't worry, Helix has got you covered. They offer a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty on their mattresses. So if by the end of 3 months that you've had to give it a test drive, make sure you love it. If you don't, for whatever reason, you can let Helix know. Someone will come and pick it up for you and then you'll get your money back. If you want to be like I've been lately and have that relationship where you're daydreaming of going to bed and just all cozied and snuggled up, that type of relationship with your sleep, you can click on the link in my description below or go to helixsleep.com/Sherrilyn and get $200 off of your Helix sleep mattress and 2 free super cozy pillows. Once again, that is helixsleep.com/Sherrilyn. You can thank me later. And thank you again, Helix, so much for sponsoring today's video and for having all of our sleep needs covered. Now I'm feeling like I made a huge mistake and I should have been filming on the mattress, because then I could just be in bed right now doing that. Maybe that'll be my new filming style, just laying on the bed with popcorn just all over my chest, wine stains on my pillow. It's funny because it's true. Before I give you guys today's riddle, oh my gosh, I just have to say I loved your answers last week. Most of them were right, which was hilarious because you were all second guessing yourself, being okay, I'm really not sure if I watched too much crime, if I'm a little bit morbid, but I think the guy ate the other guy. And I was like, yes, that's it. And then you guys were all just making each other feel good in the comments, being don't worry, I felt the same. All right, today's riddle is: a body is found on the ground at the base of a multi-story building. The victim appears to have taken their own life by jumping at one of the windows, but a detective is called to the scene nonetheless. The detective enters the building, walks to the first floor window that aligns with the body, opens it, tosses out a coin. He then goes to the second floor window immediately over the body, opens it, does the same. He then proceeds to the window overlooking the body on each floor of the building, repeating the exact same procedure. The police gathered on the ground think he's lost his mind, but once he's opened the window and tossed the coin from the top floor window, he climbs back down to the street level and tells the assembled police officers that the person was, in fact, murdered. How did he know? All right, get all snuggled in and let's get started. Today's case takes place in Somerville in the mid-90s. Oh, the 90s. Even though the case has been closed for almost 30 years, to this day there are still a lot of people who feel like there was a rush to judgment and a lot of political scapegoating that went on to send an innocent 15-year-old named Eddie O'Brien to jail for the rest of his life for killing his best friend's mother. That being said, there are also a lot of people who believe that they are being used as a tool for a reasonable doubt for appeal later on. There is a lot of accusations out there, a lot of theories, lots of speculation. I will tell you this though, you probably will go over every single one of them in your head and agree that there are still a lot of questions and things that don't really fit or make sense. One of the biggest pieces of controversy for this case is that a book was written by a lawyer named Margot Nash. When she wrote the book, she had been a lawyer for about 12 years at the time, and she wrote this book that was over 300 pages long, going through every piece of the case and detailing what she thought was missed, overlooked, and why she felt like Eddie was innocent despite his fingerprints being at the scene, witnesses who believed they saw him leaving the scene. Not only that, but him admitting that he was in the house, saw her dead, and had some of her blood on him. This all happened on July 23rd, 1995 in a place called Somerville. The morning of the crime, Eddie O'Brien, who was 15 years old, started his morning by getting ready to go to his job at a local store called Midnight. He loved his job. It was like a second home to him. Even on his days off, he would always go there and hang out with his co-workers, and people seemed to love him. He was known as the gentle giant. He was definitely like the biggest kid in his class and amongst his friends. But even though his size could be intimidating to some people, he was described as just very kind and gentle. He was raised in a good family-oriented house, born on January 28th, 1980 to his parents Ed and Trisha. They also had two other children, his sisters Jeannie and Jessica. They were all living together in his grandfather's house, who they called Papa. He was in the late stages of cancer and had decided to refuse any further treatment. He was just ready to go on to the next phase of his journey, so the O'Briens were there taking care of him. His dad had a great job. He was the manager of the mailing and receiving department at Harvard University. At the time of the crime, Eddie was a sophomore at Don Bosco Catholic High School in Boston. Every time I read that, I just felt like it just like had this like pizzazz to it. Like it deserves a little, I go to Don Bosco. I feel like if you're from Boston, you've got that edge to you, you know? He was a good student. He was also an altar boy at his parish. He was a sports nut. Anything and everything sport, didn't matter what sport it was, he was in. Well, not in terms of like playing. I guess he did try out for his high school football team, but he didn't make it because he wasn't aggressive enough. He seemed to have a good head on his shoulders though. He had his part-time job and he was also making money on the side by babysitting for kids in the neighborhood. The neighborhood sounds very tight-knit. It was one of those areas where you knew everything about your neighbors. You left your doors unlocked so like the neighborhood kids could come and go, or even like your neighborhood friends would just pop in for coffee unannounced. It was described as the type of community where if you came home with like a bunch of groceries in your trunk and you just saw other people's children, you'd be like, hey, Sally, come help me get this milk inside. That sounded a little bit creepy. You know what I mean? Like if there was multiple children and you needed help like unloading like a lot of groceries, not just like a jug of milk, like that is obviously suspicious, but everybody got together to help everybody is what I was trying to get at. So across the street from the O'Brien house was the Downing house, and that's where Eddie's best friend Ryan lived with his twin brother, his two sisters, and his mom Janet. She was described as really sweet and sensitive and timid. Her good friends say that she was the type of person that even if somebody like raised their voice in conversation, she took it really personally and it affected her. She didn't like any type of confrontation. At 42, she was working for Harvard Health in Medford and living with her 3 children in a duplex. She rented the other half of the duplex to a family called the Rexleys, and Janet was just living with the twins and one of her daughters on the other side. Her oldest daughter had gotten caught up in a really bad crowd and was currently in a shelter at that time. It sounds like Janet really had a hard time forgiving herself for making that decision to, no longer enable her daughter. Just based on what I read about her, I can only imagine how painful that would have been. She sounds like the mom and friend that would help whoever she could. So if it's your child that you're watching struggling, but you just can't encourage and enable it and they've got to want to help themselves, it's got to be agonizing. The kids in the neighborhood spent the majority of their time at the Downings, especially Eddie. He had lived across the street from them since he was 5 years old and grew up with Ryan being his best friend that whole time. There was a crew of about 6 of them that liked to hang out together, and July 23rd, 1995 was no different. That day, Eddie got ready to go to work at 7 a.m. It sounds like his only responsibility that day was to put some papers together, so his shift wasn't really long, and his sister came to pick him up, take him back home, and he had a nap. When he got up, he watched TV for a little bit and then went to church with his older sister. After that, he got dropped off and went back to work just to hang out with some coworkers for a while, and then came back to the neighborhood around 6:30, where he met up with Ryan and his other friends at Ryan's house. It sounds like it was just a typical evening with kids that age. You just kind of tease each other, mess around. There was one point where Eddie and one of their friends went to go to the dining room where the TV and video games were. They wanted to go play Sega, but they saw that Janet was sleeping on the couch in there, so then they went back and joined the other guys, and they were like, oh, your mom's sleeping, so we'll just let her do that. And then around 8 p.m., the kids left to go swimming, but Eddie decided to stay back and go home. This was actually quite normal for him, his friends said, because he was a little bit heavier and insecure about his body. So when they would go and do aquatic activities, he would just sit out. He went back home to hang out with his dad and sister. His older sister was actually at the beach with Ryan's twin brother, who was her best friend. Eddie's dad said the 2 of them sat on the porch and chatted with one of their neighbors and his 2-year-old son for a while. Then Eddie went inside to listen to his radio. He got a Disney movie all set up for his sister. And then around 9:15, he left the house to go and get some Burger King. He said on his way to Burger King, he decided to go and see if Ryan had come back to the house. He said he knocked on the door and he thought he heard some commotion and somebody saying help. He noticed the door was slightly open, so he went inside. When he walks in, he says that he sees blood immediately all over the stairs and the hallway. He just kind of freezes and looks to his side, and then he said he saw Mrs. Downing on the ground in the dining room. Initially, he just ran over to her to wake her up to see what was going on. His first thoughts were, if she fell down, why is there so much blood? He thought that she had just tripped and fell and wasn't understanding why there was blood everywhere. He said he turned her over, and that's when he noticed extensive injuries. There was obvious signs of a brutal attack. There were 98 stab wounds. He said he got up to run for help, and according to him, when he turned around, he saw a man standing at the hallway yelling for him to shut the door. Allegedly, he grabbed Eddie, put a knife to his throat, and told him that if he told anybody what he saw there, he was going to kill him and his family. Eddie said this person was wearing a nylon over their face, so he couldn't make out any identifiable features and didn't recognize him. Did you guys ever do that? Oh my God, me and my friends, we used to put the nylons on our face and then pull it up and okay, it's really embarrassing. He said this guy in the nylon mask told him to run, And since he was in the way of the front door, he ran through the house, through the cellar that they had and the back door to escape through the backyard. He said he was too scared to go home, so he did go to the Burger King and went to the washroom and just stood there for about 15 to 20 minutes, gathering himself. I guess his work was close by, so since they were like another family and comfort to him, he decided to go there. And as he's running over there, he says that two boys with a knife stop him and tell him to give them his money. He said he had about $17 on him, so he gave it to them. And then the one kid was like, now that you've seen our face, we've got to hurt you. Kind of lunges at him with this knife, and Eddie puts up his hands to deflect. As Eddie is showing up to his work, Ryan Downing is arriving at his home and walking into this scene and finding his mother. When Eddie arrives at his job, he tells his boss that he's been jumped. His boss calls the police, and they arrive about 15 minutes later and notice that Eddie's got cuts on his right hand. There was a cut in the top crease of his pinky finger. Another one was on the pad area of his palm, and then there was one at the tip of his right thumb. He wasn't bleeding at the time, but they just wanted him to get checked over, so the police took him to the hospital. The doctors gave them the go-ahead to drive him back to his house. When he got home, I guess there was a conversation with his grandfather who was like, no, you need to turn around and go back to the hospital and get a tetanus shot if you like don't know who these people were or like where this knife came from. So he and his dad go back to the hospital. Given everything that's happening at Janet's house, word is spreading, and the police are notified by the hospital that there's a teen here now that has injuries to their hand. So they go there, talk to him, take pictures, and swab some blood that's on him. Since he was with his dad, they asked for permission to bring them both to the station for an interview, and he agrees. But while Eddie's talking to them, he doesn't tell them anything that he says he saw at Janet's house. He just tells them the story about the mugging, and they're not really buying it. So they take his fingerprints, take his clothes, shoes, take more photographs, specifically of the cuts on his hands, and he's also got some scrapes on his arms and knees. Back at the neighborhood, as everyone is just kind of rallying around in shock, a neighbor and friend says that she was with Janet for the majority of the day and alleges she saw Janet's brother-in-law walking towards the crime scene, saying that he just got a notification over his like dispatch radio for the cab that he was driving that Janet was dead. According to her, this was suspicious because she didn't feel like he looked like he was just driving around in a cab. It looked like he was like freshly clean. I mean, who are we to judge? Maybe he just like wears a lot of hair gel and it just like looked like he had wet hair. But the reason that it caused concern for her was not only that Janet wasn't even pronounced dead yet, she wasn't pronounced dead until she was brought to the hospital later. But she said she just spent the day with Janet and her brother-in-law did come up in conversation and none of it was good. Her neighbor said that Janet was there from about 7 till 5. She did leave 2 times, just very briefly, to run errands once with her daughter and once with her son, but then came right back. During her visit, it seemed like the main issue on her mind was that she thought that her boss was trying to find ways to fire her. She said she had just had a really poor job review and it was because she was put into a position that she wasn't qualified for, and she thought it was just like strategic way of like pushing her out, being like, well, you know, you're not doing good at your job. They also talked about an unsolved murder of a young girl that happened about a year prior, and I guess Janet said, if anything were to ever happen to me, investigate, investigate, investigate were her words. She said even if it was something that looked like an accident, like a fall or a car accident, investigate it. So her friend was like, okay, like, are we expecting something to happen? Like, what's going on? She said no, not really, but she had stuff on her mind. A few days earlier, she had an encounter with her brother-in-law and it made her uncomfortable. She said that she had this book on her nightstand that she had been reading every night, and it was about divorce, and she was currently going through a divorce. And the neighbor said that Janet told her that book was always on her nightstand and it went missing. And then all of a sudden it reappears in her brother-in-law's hand at her work in the parking lot, and he tells her that he had found it in another parking lot. Allegedly, Janet said that she was uncomfortable around him. He was married to Janet's sister, and they lived with Janet for a brief amount of time. I think it was about a year with their son. This neighbor said that Janet said tensions were high in the house. I guess her sister and her brother-in-law fought a lot, so it kind of made like a little bit of a hostile environment. It was family though, so she tolerated it. But then according to this lady, Janet had a breaking point when she found out that her brother-in-law was dealing drugs out of the basement in this like mini fridge that he had down there. So at this point, she told them that was like a deal breaker and they had to leave. I do want to mention that I have read a lot of information about the case, and I've also gone through a lot of the comments in these forums, and Janet's family has spoken in them, so I do want to acknowledge that I've seen that. Her daughter has said that Janet never kicked them out of the house, and that the day that they left, Janet was really sad. The brother-in-law's name is out there. I don't want to put it out there in my video just because he's never been named as a suspect, and I just don't want to add to a lot of finger pointing and accusations that are going on right now. I just want to share why many people believe that there are other people to look at besides Eddie. So Janet's friend said that after they moved out, eerie things were happening around the house. She speculated that it was her brother-in-law trying to intimidate her, being like, like, I'm coming in the house while you're not here. There were things that were like going missing, things being moved. One time she said she came home and he was in her home, and according to this neighbor, Janet said he told her that the kids had let her in and that Janet told her that the kids denied it. Apparently, she asked for the house key back, and then he told her he couldn't give it back because he lost it. I guess her neighbor told Janet that she did see his car in the driveway often, but she just like assumed that she knew he was there because, like her daughter said, like he was family. But according to her, Janet said he absolutely had no business being there or permission while she wasn't home. I guess the neighbor suggested that maybe Janet open up a file and just like kind of have something out there, just like addressing her concerns. But Janet didn't want to do it because, like I said, she was going through a divorce, and she thought that if there was, something out there in writing that said she thought that things were getting moved around and going missing or disappearing and reappearing, that it would be spun to make it look like she was like crazy or unfit, and she didn't want anything to happen with like custody of her children. So they just left it as her neighbor would keep an eye out, and if she saw anything, she'd let Janet know, and then she'd also go over there and just like say like, hey, like, do you have permission to be here? After their visit, Janet left her friend's house at about 5 p.m. and went to go and get groceries. When she returned, there was a bunch of the kids in their front lawns, and she rallied them in to help her unload everything. That's when they all stayed to hang out for a little bit at Ryan's house, and we know that Janet fell asleep on her couch, and then they went on to go swimming. Now, this, for me, is where I feel like the timeline is really focused on, and where people who believe that Eddie is innocent feels like this timeline really helps prove it. So at 8:15, the neighbors who shared a wall with Janet in the other side of the duplex say that they heard a really loud bang. They even had their daughter over visiting, and everybody heard it to the point where they were like, what the shit was that? Should we go over and check things out? But they knew that Janet had a dog that barked at absolutely everything, and there was no barking or like noise coming from the dog, so they just figured everything was okay. The area that they heard this in, like that wall that they shared, was where Janet's staircase would have been, and we know that there was significant amount of blood in that area. Around this exact time, Janet's other son had quickly come home to go and grab some things to go head out to the beach with his best friend, who was Eddie's sister. He said when he got home, he saw her asleep on the couch. Nothing looked out of sorts. Eddie's sister said that he was in there for about 20 minutes and then he came out and they left. At this same time, this is when Eddie was at home with his dad and his sister. I guess his mom was at like a music festival or something like that. And he was there until 9:15 when he decided that he wanted to go and get Burger King. And then that's when we heard Eddie's side of the story. So about 45 minutes later from him leaving, is when Ryan arrived at home. It was about 9:55. He walks into this ghastly scene, finds his mom on the floor. Like I said, extensive injuries, obvious signs that there was an attack that took place in several areas of the house because there was like blood in other areas, and there was also furniture that was like flipped around. I just can't imagine how terrible that would have been to find, like being a 15-year-old boy and it's your mother. He immediately runs out and he heads to Eddie's house to go and get help from Eddie's dad. Ed Sr. runs in the house and basically just runs out and then runs over to the neighbors yelling for help, and he goes to call the police. I guess the police are there within a minute. So everything is unfolding really fast. That's when we know around this time Eddie was at his work, went to the hospital, has been driven back. Now he has gone back to the hospital with his dad, and based on the call to the police of him being there with a knife wound, that's when they go to interview him. Like I said, because he couldn't explain the scratches that he had like on his arms and on his knees, and they weren't really buying like the story of him being jumped and just like cut because he saw somebody, they just felt it was best to keep his clothes, take photos, and just like have that for reference. And when he left, they pretty much decided that he was responsible for whatever was going on at that moment at the Downing house. 2 days after the murder, detectives go and they search Eddie's house, and they find this red penknife that is in his garbage can in the backyard. Allegedly, Eddie had 2 of these knives. One of them was the red one, and he also had a green one that he got from his grandfather's collection. And this was significant because at the crime scene, there was a piece of metal that detectives believed was part of like the base of a knife, like used to, there's like a specific word for it. I'll enter it in, because not coming to me, but it's like part of the handle and the knife so that your hand like doesn't slip. And so it was a piece of that metal that was broken off and just like in the rug on the stairs. So when they find this red one, they see that that piece looks similar to the one on the red one, and they hear that there was a green one that is now missing. So they're like, does this belong to the green one? They searched everywhere for it, but they never found it. But Eddie's boss does further support the fact that he did see a green one and that he knew that there was, something wonky going on with that base actually. He said that Eddie brought it in to see if they could be fixed because that one piece that like blocks like your hand from slipping was loose. After searching his house, they went to talk to his group of friends. And 3 of the boys said that they went to Ryan's house around 9:30. They also wanted to see if Ryan had made it home by this point. They also said that they knocked and no one answered. They said that the front door was open, but I guess there was also like an inner door in the house that was closed. So one of them went to the back deck to see if anybody was back there. He got no answer, but he noticed that the back cellar door was wide open. And then he said he heard this like rustling in the bushes. He sees someone who he describes as Eddie's size jump out and run away. He wasn't 100% sure that it was Eddie, but like it looked to be him enough that he called out like, "Hey, Eddie, like what are you doing? Good hiding spot." But this person didn't turn back, and he couldn't positively identify him as Eddie. Then they went through Janet's house like top to bottom, and after the evidence collected there came through, they had all they needed. They found Eddie's left thumb, index finger, and middle fingerprint on the post at the foot of the cellar staircase. There were also prints from his right index finger and right middle finger found on the inside of the interior front door. And there was also blood that matched his blood type on one of Janet's dress that was hanging on a dryer line in the cellar. Eddie was arrested, but even then, he still doesn't say anything to police about allegedly walking into a murder that had just taken place. It wasn't until he was in custody for about 2 weeks that he finally decided to tell the story. He wrote a note to his lawyer and told him his version of everything that went down. Like all of us, when he hears this version, he's like, I don't think so, Tim.
I don't think so, Tim.
So he arranges for Eddie to do a forensic interview, and he's under the influence of sodium amytal? It's truth serum. So he takes this like truth serum and does this test, and the results come back that he's being truthful. But like a lie detector test, it's not admissible in court. So his trial forges on. None of that stuff is allowed to be used. And at the trial, the prosecutor forms his case around the fact that he believed that Eddie had an obsession with Janet, and it was like a heat of passion crime. It was alleged that Eddie would watch her very closely, sometimes through a telescope in his bedroom. They said that he frequently asked Ryan about his mother's activities. Ryan did say that there was a time where he asked him why his mom always hung around in her car for a while and had a cigarette after she came home from the day and didn't just like go straight into the house. So they took that as like he was watching, you know, her routine. Ryan's brother also told the court that he heard that Eddie told people he had watched Mrs. Downing undress. And then Ryan said that the day before the murder, him and Eddie were just, you know, having like a conversation, and he says to him, you know, like, have you ever had thoughts of hurting someone? Eddie says that he desperately wanted to testify at his trial and give his side of the story and explain things to the jurors, but his lawyers didn't think that it was a good idea, but they never told him. They just made their closing arguments and basically looked at him and were like, this is for the best. After the trial wraps up, he is found guilty. And because of a new law that had recently passed, even though he was a juvenile, he was tried and convicted as an adult and given life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that is what Margot Nash, the author of the book written about this case, believes was the reason for him being sentenced and looked at so quickly in this case, because she felt like he was being used as a political scapegoat. In 1995, when Eddie was sentenced, there was a movement going on in the United States where people believed that the inner cities were about to become war zones of juvenile, what they referred to as super predators. Margot Nash says that the DA on this case was hoping to advance his political career. So she feels that he used Eddie as an example, basically to show like other juvenile criminals, like, this is what's going to happen. We're not messing around. And if he was the one to do that, he had much higher chances of furthering his political career, which is what happened. So this is why Eddie's supporters feel like a lot was overlooked, and there was more than ample examples of reasonable doubt that should have been brought forward, and at the very least, he deserves a new trial. The way they see it, their first issue is with the timeline. If the commotion in the house at 8:15 that the Downing neighbors heard was in fact like the murder going down, Ed was on his porch with his dad's friend John, and John's 2-year-old son. I guess on top of them also hearing this like loud bang at 8:15, at 9 o'clock, they also were unable to use their water to wash dishes because the water pressure was so low. And this was something that regularly happened at the house, and it happened when water was being used at the Downing house. And when police got on scene, Janet's water in the washroom was running, and it was like running at like full pressure. So Eddie's supporters believe this is from the killer using the water to like clean themselves up before they leave, because a crime of that magnitude would leave somebody like covered head to toe in blood. So if this water pressure issue happened at 9, well, at 9 o'clock, Eddie was still at home. He didn't leave the house until about 20 minutes later for this like burger run excursion. Now, let's say the timeline is wrong, and that is very possible, and Eddie was there at 9 p.m. to clean himself up. He could have only cleaned like his skin and like hair, but he wouldn't have had time to clean his clothes, and the clothes that he was wearing when he was photographed by the police were the same clothes that people saw him in all day. I do want to mention that I did read that there was a witness that thought that they saw him in a darker shirt at one point. So it's been alleged that he wore a darker shirt, committed the crime, and then just took it off so that he could have like the clothes he was wearing earlier on underneath. But experts feel like that also is implausible because it would have soaked through. Like there was just so much blood at the scene. There would have been some traces of it that at least like soaked through from the darker shirt onto the one that he was wearing underneath. And there was nothing on his clothes. He only had a spot of Janet's blood on his shin. There was none anywhere else, not like under his nails, his clothes, in the crevice of his shoes, like nowhere. But in terms of his blood at the scene, there were multiple areas where that was found. It does follow the path of where he said he ran out of the house. And when he was asked if he remembers cutting himself there, he can't. He says that he wishes that he could say like, yes, like the man that I saw attacked me with a knife, I got cut, and that's how my blood got in some of these spots. But he says like he never once remembered feeling like any pain or getting cut anywhere at the house. The only time he said that he knowingly got cut was when he was jumped by these people robbing him. In terms of the scrapes on his knees and his arms, he says that he does remember stumbling and like falling into this like prickly bush that was in the backyard while he was running away. So he feels like that is where that was from. And then there's the piece of the knife. I guess this wasn't tested for DNA until 2 years after it was found. Even then, there was no DNA of Eddie's on it. There was unknown male DNA on it, but it was never run through CODIS. And it also wasn't tested against anybody in the family. There also were other fingerprints found on the scene. One was found in the washroom where they believe that the killer was washing himself up, but that too hasn't been identified. Apparently, there was also cat hair that was found on Janet's hand and finger. Janet nor the O'Briens owned a cat. There was also brown hair that was found on the palm of her left hand that was never tested. And there was some blood on one of the cat hairs that was also never tested. Same with DNA that was found under Janet's fingernails. There was a secondary source of male DNA under there, and it didn't match Eddie. When it comes to the main motive of why he allegedly committed this murder, like his obsession with Janet, Eddie says that it's just not true. He said he liked Janet, he knew her for his whole life, but he wasn't obsessed with her. And pretty much everybody who knows Eddie also felt the same. Like there was never any signs that he was like, you know, like being like a little creepy kid towards her. Janet never said that he made her uncomfortable. In fact, her family, they say like he was just like this nice kid who snapped one day. Like they don't even have a reason why this happened. They said that he was the last person they would have ever expected something like this to happen from. In terms of the accusation that he would watch Janet undress, he said that that is not true. He said there was an evening where him and one of his good friends were sitting on his porch and they did see a lady undressing and they did tell their friends about it, but it wasn't Janet. And that friend that he said he was with has also confirmed this. Allegedly, there were several people who tried to share their stories with police that they thought could help further the investigation, but they were never called back. The first was the neighbor who said that she spent her last day with Janet. She had her suspect in mind right from the start, not only because Janet had brought him up that day, but she saw him minutes after she found out everything was going on, which was Janet's brother-in-law. And one thing that really stood out to her was that she saw the cab that he drove parked in the wrong direction of the street, and it was beside Janet's backyard. And she noticed that it was blocked in by all of the first responding vehicles, which she feels is a sign that he was there prior to any of them even arriving on the scene. On top of that, she also thought that it looked like he was freshly showered. Again, he could just, like a lot of hair product. Another thing that made her suspicious was that he said that he got a call over his CB radio, and she was like, since when did cab dispatchers share information that somebody was murdered when they haven't even been pronounced dead yet? On top of that, she also says that while they're talking about Janet, he all of a sudden just starts patting his pockets and freaks out, and he says that he just realizes that he lost his keys. He's looking all around, and then he's like, I think I lost them in Janet's backyard. So he heads over to go to the yard to go look in it, but at this point, the crime scene tape was already put up, so police wouldn't let him go through. He wasn't allowed to go through, I believe, for the rest of that night and into the next day. His cab was actually towed because he wasn't allowed to go back there. And when the investigators did look through the backyard, they did find his keys and returned them to him. Allegedly, there was no questions asked about the crime or why they were there. He was questioned, but only to be asked questions about Eddie. And it was things like, would Eddie know where to find knives that were in the house? Allegedly, 3 other friends of Janet's did attempt to contact the police to share their stories of individually hearing Janet say that she felt like her brother-in-law was entering the house when she wasn't there, but they were never called back. One of these friends said that the police just told her they had all of the information that they needed for the case, and any story like that wouldn't be admissible because it was considered hearsay. Even the neighbor who had a form of a timeline you would think of, like events going down from hearing the loud noise and then having her water pressure affected, she was never interviewed. She said that it wasn't until 2 weeks before she went to trial that the district attorney asked her some questions. As of today, even though he was sentenced to life without parole, there is a chance that Eddie could come up for parole because of a ruling by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Juveniles convicted of murder now have an opportunity to apply for parole. Janet's family has been very vocal about this. They have rallied to have petitions signed to prevent this from happening. They are 100% convinced that the person responsible for killing Janet is exactly where he needs to be, behind bars. And my heart really does go out to them because they are completely innocent in all of this. And it can't be easy to truly in your heart feel like you know who's responsible for doing this to your loved one and realizing that there's a chance that they could be set free. That being said, though, what if the person who did this isn't in jail? I don't think that that means that Janet's brother-in-law is responsible, but what if somebody else was? In my opinion, I do feel like after reading the book, it was bias. I felt like there were a lot of double standards in there. But one thing you can't deny is that she went through everything piece by piece. And she does raise reasonable doubt. I feel like there is quite a bit of hearsay also. We have to just kind of take her word on it when she talks about experts who, once believed that Eddie was guilty and they now don't really feel the same. Janet's family has been vocal on social media saying that they have no doubts that Eddie is guilty, and they're really upset that there's an insinuation that their family member is being looked at as having something to do with it. Their opinions are that when it comes to the timeline of the neighbor saying that they heard this loud bang at 8:15 and that Eddie, couldn't possibly be there, their opinion is that they're just wrong. They said that evening when they went to Janet's house, those neighbors never said anything to them that night. So they never came and said, I heard something at this time, like, oh my gosh, I should have gone to check, and that all of a sudden this came out and that they weren't aware of it. So they feel like they're not sure what the motive behind it would have been, but they believe they're wrong. As far as how they feel about Janet's neighbor that she spent her last days with, not fans. They feel that Janet would have never shared personal information with her, especially anything that had to do with her brother-in-law. Again, I can only imagine how hard the whole situation would be, so I probably would also feel the same way as they do when it came to having somebody I cared about being accused of killing my family member. My personal thoughts are I really don't know either way at the end of all of this. I feel like there are issues in the case on both sides. To be honest, I do have such a hard time believing Eddie's story. It is brought up in the book, Margot Nash says that she's talked to him about it and says, bro, this is really embarrassing. Like, this is a terrible story you've made up. Like, couldn't you do better? And he's acknowledged and said, like, I wish that I had a different story for you, but this is what happened. So, I mean, it could be true, it could not, but I do feel like I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know. What I do know is that given how gruesome the crime scene was, I do feel like whoever did this would have been covered in blood and not just have like one drop of blood on their shin. Like, that's it. Out of 98 wounds, just one drop. So yeah, I don't know. I really want to hear your guys' thoughts. You know, hearing from you guys in these cases always brings perspective, and I do love and appreciate that you are always so respectful to everybody involved. So I really want to hear, like, if you were, you know, like a juror on this, or if you were like a member of the parole board and like all of this would be brought to you, what would you do? All right, that is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. You know I love and I appreciate you so, so much. And the moment you have been waiting for, the answer to the riddle. If you need a quick refresher, a body is found on the ground at the base of a multi-story building. The victim appears to have taken their own life by jumping out of one of the windows, but a detective is called to the scene nonetheless. The detective enters the building, walks to the first floor window immediately over the body, opens it, and tosses out a coin. He then goes to the second floor window immediately over the body, opens it, and does the same. He then proceeds to the window overlooking the body on each floor of the building, repeating the exact same procedure. The police gathered below think he's lost his mind, but once he's opened the window and tossed the coin from the top floor window, he climbs back down to the street level and tells the assembled police that the person was, in fact, murdered. How did he know? The answer is, if this person took their own life, one of those windows would have still been opened, but they were all closed. All right, I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.